You hear saltwater slap the pier and the sick-sweet smell of dumped tea, while a handful of cloaked men in soot-smudged faces toss chests overboard like punk activists vandalizing a corporate shipment. Textbooks sell this as a neatly patriotic moment when a united colonial people heroically rejected taxation and tyranny. The truth is uglier and smellier. The Boston Tea Party was a small, carefully staged stunt by a tight-knit group of merchants and radicals, designed to provoke legal action and insurance disputes rather than rally every farmer and shopkeeper. Many colonists were furious at the damage. Tea was valuable property and a commodity tied to networks of credit and trade. The event mattered because it was a political signal, not because it materially harmed Britain's economy overnight. So when your textbook makes it sound like a spontaneous people's uprising, remember, it was PR theater with tarry hands and a spreadsheet of consequences. Number 1, your textbook probably whispers that the American Revolution was a righteous march by a united people toward liberty and democracy. The messy reality is that colonial society was riven by sharp divisions. Loyalists who preferred stability and British legal protections, merchants anxious about trade, enslaved people seeking freedom in other ways, and indigenous nations trying to play settlers off one another. Many communities were split badly enough that neighbors sued neighbors and families fractured. Revolutionary governments often relied on coercion, confiscation of loyalist property, and brutal militia enforcement to maintain control. The outcome wasn't an inevitable triumph of principle, but the result of political maneuvering, economic pressure, propaganda, and raw violence. So the neat story of unanimous patriotism is a comfort story, not a historically accurate one. Number 2, you learned Marie Antoinette said, "Let them eat cake," and that line encapsulated her monstrous indifference. It's a tidy quote that turns a complex crisis into a single villainous soundbite, but she almost certainly never said it, and the phrase predates her. The line was propaganda, used to stoke outrage against an already unpopular royal household, and to simplify structural economic problems into moral failure by one woman. France's food crisis came from war debts, grain market speculation, and a tax system that collapsed under elite exemptions, not just bad royal taste. Blaming one speechy dessert-loving queen lets textbooks dodge the real culprits. Fiscal collapse, political gridlock, and an elite class that preferred pleasant salons to serious reform. The myth comforts us with a scapegoat, while the structural rot continues to look boring on paper. Number 3, schoolbook pages made Columbus look like a lone genius stumbling onto a brand new world, like some historical GPS miracle. The jarring truth is that the Americas were densely populated with millions of people, intricate trade networks, and centuries of technological and cultural development long before 1492. Columbus didn't discover emptiness. He opened the door to catastrophic contact, disease, forced labor systems, and ecological upheaval. European accounts downplayed indigenous sophistication and agency because that narrative justified conquest, seizure, and settler myth-making. The tragedy was immediate and systemic. Epidemics, disrupted societies, and colonial economies built on stolen land. So replace the heroic landing image with one of crowded shores and a violent, game-changing handshake. Number 4, textbooks often paint the Spanish Empire as either a brutal plunderer or a benevolent civilizer, neatly fitting moral boxes that simplify centuries of messy interaction. The reality is more complicated. There were saints and sinners, royal laws meant to protect indigenous peoples sitting beside encomienda systems that exploited them, and missionaries who alternately destroyed and syncretized local beliefs. Colonial governance involved negotiation and alliance as much as coercion. Indigenous leaders sometimes leveraged Spanish power for local advantage. Economic extraction and missionary zeal coexisted with legal debates, thinkers like Bartolomé de las Casas, and pockets of cultural resilience. So the empire wasn't monolithic evil or benevolent teacher. It was an entangled system with winners, losers, and many shades of moral compromise. Number 5, you were probably told Napoleon was nationally famous for being tiny, which everyone thinks explains his aggression and complex. That joke traces to British propaganda mixing French and English measurement units and a flurry of caricatures. He wasn't unusually short for his time, roughly average height. The Napoleon complex idea is a centuries-late psychoanalysis projected onto geopolitical ambition. His stature myth became a rhetorical weapon to belittle a man who reconfigured European law, war, and administration, not a clinical diagnosis. The truth is he was a complex political leader, decisive and ruthless, whose image was warred over by print culture. So stop imagining shortness as a motive, imagine political genius and ruthless statecraft instead. Number 6. Classrooms often point to October 1929 and the stock market crash as the single cause of the Great Depression, like a button someone pressed. The reality is a long, tangled collapse. Bank failures, crushing international debt from World War I, protectionist tariffs like Smoot-Hawley strangling trade, and policy mistakes by central banks. The crash wiped paper wealth, but the systemic collapse of credit and confidence and policy paralysis made recovery slow and painful. Rural economies and global markets were already fragile. Deflation amplified debt burdens and unemployment fed a vicious cycle. So don't let a dramatic market photo fool you. The Depression was an ecosystem collapse, not a single dramatic. Number 7. Schools often peg the Treaty of Versailles as the single dumb move that doomed Europe to Hitler and World War II, as if one piece of paper directly birthed Nazism. It's true the treaty humiliated Germany and created resentments, but blaming it alone is lazy history. Germany's political fragmentation, economic crises like hyperinflation and later the Depression, the failure of Weimar democracy, and global isolationism all played enormous roles. Additionally, domestic political movements and the appeal of aggressive nationalism were active choices, not just reactions to Versailles. So yes, the treaty mattered, but it was one ingredient in a toxic stew of structural failures, opportunistic leadership, and global economic catastrophe. Number 8. Schools often teach that the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on Japan solely to end the war quickly and save lives from a planned invasion. That narrative simplifies a brutal moral decision and ignores geopolitical calculus. The bombs also sent a dramatic message to the Soviet Union and factored into post-war bargaining. There's also evidence that Japan was close to surrendering under certain conditions, and that conventional bombings and blockades had already devastated infrastructure and morale. Finally, the racialized logic and total war mentality shaped targeting decisions and casualty calculations. So the story is not single-purpose humanitarianism. It's a messy intersection of military aims, diplomacy, racial attitudes, and a desire to test terrifying new technology on people rather than machines. Number 9. Many textbook summaries reduce the American Civil War to a vague debate over states' rights, as if slavery were a footnote. That's a comfortable whitewash. The primary right being defended by Southern states was the legal protection of slavery, the right to own people as property, and to expand that system into new territories. Confederate documents, speeches, and secession declarations repeatedly cite slavery as central, not incidental. Talking about states' rights without naming slavery hides why the war was fought and why Reconstruction mattered so painfully. So be precise. State sovereignty arguments were usually cover language for preserving slavery's racial hierarchy and economic system. Number 10. The usual school portrait of Genghis Khan paints him as a mindless destroyer who only razed cities and left ash. That's true in part. Mongol conquests were often brutally efficient, but they also created unprecedented connectivity across Eurasia. Khan's empire standardized trade routes, protected merchants under diplomatic passports, and facilitated the movement of ideas, technologies, and even medical knowledge. Administrative and legal reforms helped govern a vast, multicultural domain, and some conquered peoples prospered under Mongol protection of the Silk Road. This dual legacy means he was both mass killer and state builder. A terrifying combination that rewired the pre-modern world, rather than simply erasing it. Number 11. We're told the Renaissance rescued Europe from the Dark Ages in one dramatic cultural sunrise, like someone flipped a modernity switch. That exaggerates both decline and rebirth. The so-called Dark Ages included vibrant intellectual activity, trade, and technological innovation. The Renaissance borrowed heavily from medieval scholarship and rediscovered classical texts that had been preserved by medieval and non-Western scholars. Cultural changes were gradual, geographically uneven, and often elite-driven, not a wholesale transformation for everyone at once. Science, art, and politics evolved in fits and starts across long timelines with plenty of continuity. So the clean break narrative is comforting mythology. History moves messy and sideways, not in neat centuries. Number 12. Textbooks often turn Custer's last stand into tragic heroism, a doomed cavalry charge against overwhelming odds, noble and inevitable. The messy truth is that it was a botched reconnaissance turned into slaughter by arrogant orders, miscommunication, and poor understanding of indigenous tactics and numbers. Custer divided his forces against military advice, underestimated coordinated resistance by Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors, and failed to consolidate support. The myth of gallantry smoothed over tactical incompetence and policy failures, while indigenous resistance becomes a footnote to white tragedy. So the romantic picture of doomed heroism hides leadership failure, colonial aggression, and a fierce, effective defense by native people. Number 13, school timelines drop huge death toll numbers like godlike facts, X million died under Y leader, and expect you to accept them at face value. Historical mortality figures are often rough estimates, shaped by record gaps, political motivations, and methodological choices about what counts as direct killings versus war-related famine and disease. Governments inflate or deflate counts for propaganda, and early historians sometimes repeated unverified figures that stuck in public imagination. Responsible history separates categories: executions, famine, war casualties, and demographic decline, and explains uncertainty ranges. So treat headline numbers as starting points for interrogation, not final verdicts. The human tragedy is real, but the arithmetic often needs careful unpacking. Number 14. School summaries often show empires as either benevolent bringers of law and railways or simply rapacious extractors. But both extremes miss how colonial rule functioned daily. Empires produced infrastructure, legal systems, and new markets while simultaneously imposing taxes, conscription, and forced labor that dispossessed local populations. Colonial administrators often touted modernization projects in glossy reports while ignoring dispossession, racial segregation, and violent suppression of dissent. And local elites sometimes collaborated, creating hybrid power structures that weren't purely puppet or purely independent. So the sanitized stories about railways and hospitals as proof of noble mission are propaganda light. Empire was a tangled web of benefit, exploitation, and everyday coercion. Number 15, your textbook probably sums up a whole era with a single villainous face and a massive death toll number, which simplifies complex socioeconomic causes into personal evil. Leaders like Stalin or Mao are often portrayed as lone designers of mass death, but many catastrophic outcomes resulted from policy choices, structural weaknesses, wars, and environmental factors interacting with authoritarian governance. Some death figures commonly quoted combine wartime losses, famine, and political violence into a single total that obscures categories and causes. Honest history attributes responsibility widely. To institutions, to policy failures, to contingency, and yes, to brutal decisions. So replace the one-man monster narrative with a layered account that explains how systems, incentives, and contradictions produced catastrophe, not just a single mustache or mustache-adjacent scowl. After 15 times of tearing apart tidy textbook fiction, here's the take. School history often trades nuance for narrative, swapping complicated causes and mixed motives for single villains, neat quotes, and dramatic turning points. Real history looks like a headache-inducing knot. Overlapping economic pressures, cultural shifts, propaganda, local agency, and messy human decisions that refuse to fit press photo simplicity. That doesn't make the past less meaningful. It makes it more important to understand the real mechanisms, the uncomfortable continuities, and the many people squeezed by systems. If this made you rewrite the mental movie you have of the past, good, that's the point. If you want more of these reality checks, subscribe or watch the next video to keep the historical myths from getting comfortable.